go. Hi, and thanks for joining us tonight for this webinar titled How to Secure the Strongest References. My name is Jody Hammer, and I am the Career Services Specialist with NPCA's Global Reentry Program. So I have the awesome job of supporting the evacuees and RPCVs from Peace Corps with their career and transitional assistance. So it's my pleasure to be here with you tonight on this particular topic, which I am very passionate about. I think it's really an important topic, and it's one that can really make or break your job search. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about, securing the strongest references. I want to make it as interactive as possible. So if you do have questions, please add those to the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. And I anticipate we'll have extra time at the end. I don't have too many slides on this one. And then we'll be able to just do some more Q&A. Okay, great. So the securing the strongest references, let's just start going. First of all, let's look at what is a reference, right? What is a reference? And then what's the difference between a personal and a professional reference? And I'm asking that to you with the hopes that somebody will type that into the chat box, the answer, or you can certainly unmute yourself and just share it as a conversation. So what are references? That's what we're looking at. What is a personal or professional reference? And if nobody has an idea, then I guess you're really in the right spot tonight, because you need to know what they are, why they're important, how to secure them, and what you can do to help ensure that your references will give you the best reference, regardless of how long it's been, that kind of thing. So you're in the right place. So let's see. Holden, thank you. Professional is from someone you worked with, right? Or for, exactly. It could be an employer, a supervisor, or a colleague, for example. And the personal is more from someone else. So thank you, Gary, for adding that. The personal is really someone that knows you outside of work. And so, the professional, is someone who's worked with you. And those both can be important in different ways, right? Oftentimes they'll call a personal reference a character reference. And sometimes you'll have those kinds of references that are asked for in maybe, specific programs, when they're, recruiting for, and they want a personal and a professional reference. Somebody who's known you for a long time, who can vouch for your character, right? That's the personal one. Now, generally for jobs, when you're in the job market and you're trying to get a new job, generally you're going to be providing professional references, not personal ones. Even though your personal ones might be great, you're going to try to provide the professional references, because what they really care about is most generally is getting more inside information on you as an employee, as a teammate, as a subordinate, working for a company. They want to know how you fit. It's really a lot of times the cultural context, and will you be a good team player? Will you, what will you bring to this position? That kind of thing. And there's specific characteristics, right, they're looking for that are relative to the job, like what it requires. So attention to detail, or things that might come up in that reference, and they could certainly ask questions about that. So great. So thank you for providing that. I appreciate it. Why are references important? Anyone want to take a stab at this, either by unmuting yourself or by just putting it in the chat box? Why are references important? In other words, why do employers even quote unquote waste the time? Because it certainly takes time, energy, money to do reference checks, right? So there must be some reason that they do it, why they find it valuable, right? So if you have any thoughts on that, dump it into the chat box or unmute yourself now.
Hey, Jody, it's Holden.
Oh, Holden, thanks. Thanks for jumping in.
Sure. I assume that they want to employers want to just hear from someone, especially that you worked with, to make sure that you have a good work ethic, that you have the kinds of skills that you say you have.
Exactly. Absolutely. So as Alice put in the chat box, it could not have been better timed. Get a second opinion, right? You can always boast yourself up. You can talk yourself up. Oh, I'm great at this and all of that in the interview, right? But to some degree, of course, in an interview, we always recommend that, behavioral questions is what they ask oftentimes. So you prove what you're saying, but still, you could say anything. So by getting a reference, it's generally an unbiased, right, person. And that's why generally they're not looking for the personal references, right? Personal references might be more biased, like, yeah, he's my best friend. He's great, right? So they want to get more insight and a second opinion of, how you might function in that capacity. And they'll ask you a variety of questions. And oftentimes, it's your response or your lack of response or awkward silences that can sometimes happen that can key the employer in on, okay, there's something more here I should dig for, or this doesn't sound like it was as good of a relationship, or who knows, right? They can get a lot out of those things. And part of the reason, too, that it is so important that they do references, right, and make sure you are a good fit, right, is that hiring people is a really expensive endeavor, right? Bringing on somebody new is expensive, it's timely, it takes a lot of time, right? It's a lot of investment in resources to get you up to speed, trained, all of that. So they don't want to waste their time having someone come on and be unsuccessful in the first 3 months and then leave. So they really want to make sure that it's somebody who's going to be a good fit. So that is why, it's so important, right, for the employers and such. So great. Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. So what does it mean when you are asked for a reference, right? When you're asked for references, say you do your interview and then they reach out and they say, we'd like to, can you provide your professional references? It's not a job offer yet, at least, right? But it does mean that you're among the finalists, right? Because believe me, they don't call everyone's references. Usually they're making their decision down to maybe the final two, and they're like, okay, let's check references and see if anything comes out from that weighs in on what we're thinking, right? So pat yourself on the back that great, I've obviously done a great job so far in terms of getting to the interview, then getting asked for references. So that's great, but don't rest on your laurels, right? And we're going to talk about how can you make sure that your references will be and will remain strong references for you. So they're definitely interested in you, as it says here. And as I said earlier, really, as I alluded to, the reference can make or break the final offer. They could go into a reference thinking you were the candidate and they just wanted to make sure that your references kind of vouched for that. And if they came away with information that made them think, I don't know, or question, or just even kind of have a feeling of I'm not sure, they could go with the other candidate. And obviously you don't want that to happen. So we're going to talk more about how you can impact that as well. But this is a little bit about why references are so important, and they really are. So people you should ask, right? Former supervisors, employers, right? So typically it's former ones, right? Including your most recent, if possible. Now, many times we're doing a job search on the down low, right? We're conducting what I call a discrete job search. And I did a webinar on this just recently. And if you are interested in that content, you can certainly find that along with all of our other webinars on the Global Reentry playlist of the NPCA YouTube channel. So yeah, and I can include that even in the follow-ups that I send for this. I can maybe include that information as well. But you don't usually include the current one, right? Or many times you don't. If they don't know that you're doing a job search, you're not going to want to obviously say, hey, will you be a reference for me? it's going to key them in on you're doing, a job search, obviously. Now, with organizations like Peace Corps headquarters, for example, we have, I used to be there, I was there for 12 years, and we generally have a 5-year term limit, right? So 5 years, and then you have to be out as long as you were in, right? I was very fortunate to get some extensions and then be converted to an expert consultant. But anyway, they did have the term, the limits where you'd have to leave. So they understand that people are going to, once they get to be there for 3 years, maybe, to the fourth, they're going to have to start looking, because that's the only smart thing to do. You can't rely on definitely getting some kind of an extension. Those are somewhat few and far between, depends on, a lot, but you can't depend on that 100%. So I think in general, Peace Corps is fairly, if you end up getting a job with Peace Corps headquarters, it's not as important to maybe maintain that very discreet job search. But when you are trying to do that, employers understand if you don't have your most recent employer on there when you're giving references. They're not necessarily thinking, well, why didn't you do that? I mean, of course you should have included your current. No, they're going to say, well, they're doing their job search. They're not necessarily advertising that. So that makes sense, right? So yeah, look at former, supervisors, or employers, that type of thing, right? And if it is possible, your current one, that's fine. Maybe it's not your direct supervisor. Maybe it's another, supervisor, or someone who's not directly responsible for, your performance and all of that review, but it's someone else that you've done a lot of work with over the years, that kind of thing. And colleagues can be references as well, and very strong ones, because they can ask them things like, how do they work together in a team? And, what are their, biggest attributes, things like that. So you generally, I mean, I see the rule of thumb. I mean, when they talk about how recent should your references be, right? Well, ideally, like people you've worked with in the more recent years. So, ideally, if you have 3 people that you can come up with within the last 7 years, that's great. But let's face it, some people, I mean, I was at Peace Corps for 12 years, right? So for me to get an external Peace Corps one, I would have to go back 12 years. So I used a few different ones at Peace Corps where I had done, different work, for them and such. And you can't even use like a client, or a, somebody, a vendor, maybe if, somebody who put together the career fairs with us, something like that you could also think of, if you were trying to, not include your current boss. But that's that's, I think, the ideal. But if you've been at one organization for a long time, like I said, multiple people from that, but you also could look at somebody maybe from, just before that, or maybe somebody that you've done volunteer work with. Volunteer work is really important, right? And that's maybe the supervisor for that, if you've volunteered, 2 days a week for 3 years or whatever, that could certainly be something worthwhile, and they would be able to speak to you and your credibility and your all of that. So when you're asking, you want to ask somebody who knows you well, not somebody who, like, well, they have a good title. That would be good, because if they don't know you well, they're not going to be able to make that case for you and answer some of those questions, like, tell me about their strengths in this or that. And if they come out with, they can get to the bottom, and they can tell if it's kind of a shallow reference that there's not a lot of substance from, and they don't know you very well, which I have on the next slide, you'll see. But ideally, if you can have at least one person from the same, sector, or that does the same kind of work, because they would then, as the employer that you're applying for, only because that gives them some additional insight. And sometimes people can be like, oh, well, they work in a similar, context to us, what they understand what we need, and they're recommending this person. So, it's just more, more credentials, right? It just gives, more credence to, they can give more credence to that. Yeah, I already said volunteer work coordinators. So really thinking about people who know you well, who can, vouch for your, skill set and all of that. And you're going to do some things to help them so that you up the odds of getting a really strong reference. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit here as well. So let me know if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat box. I do have it up in front of me. So I'm happy to answer any of those as well. Now, people not to ask for a reference. So first of all, family members or relatives, right? And that's, I think, obvious, right? I mean, they're your family. They're not going to be neutral. They're not going to be right? They're going to be giving you that. Well, we love, they have vested interest in that, and it might be watching out for your care, like your well-being. It might also be financially. They want you to get your own job so you can get on your own and have space and all of that. So I mean, it's just it's not recommended to do that. Now, I put a little asterisk next to the relatives because sometimes there might be maybe some relative of yours, your second cousin or your uncle's wife or whatever, is big in a field, and they are very well known and respected. They obviously know you well. I mean, if they know you well, which I imagine they would, they could be helpful because they're inside that industry, right? But yes, that would be more of, remember, that would be more of a personal reference. And when jobs ask for references, you generally want to give professional references when possible, and then supplement maybe with a personal one if needed. For new grads, things like that, they might choose a professor, your advisor, someone that mentor, someone who knows you and has known you for a long time. You also don't want to ask your best friend, right? That can be okay though if you're doing a character reference. Like, say you're doing a character reference in preparation for, a foreign service officer position or whatever, where yes, they would, the background check, they would love to talk to somebody who knows you on a personal, context, in a personal context, because it can give them a lot more insight. And to check what they've said versus what you say, if that matches, if there's discrepancies, things like that. So that can certainly be okay. But in general, when you're doing the job references, you're going to stick with more of the professional references. Okay. Try to avoid people who you barely know, like I said earlier. But to add to that, maybe people who would be impressive because it's like, oh, well, they have a great title and whatever, I'll choose them, and they'll be able to just say that I'm great, whatever. But people, when they're doing these references, it's not just, they don't just call and say, so is this person great? Okay, great, thanks. And they're asking questions. They're looking to get to the bottom of and get additional information. And so, people who are doing those reference checks, they're really attuned to, like I said, those silences, those awkward silences, or, where you might say something, where it's obvious you don't know that about them, and you're trying to fudge it, but you're really not able to. So you just want to make sure that whoever you're choosing for your references are going to be able to come out with those solid answers, and to be able to say, oh, they're an excellent candidate. They worked for me from 2016 to 2018, and they were an excellent example of. You want them to really be able to shine, to make you shine, right? And then the last one I think is kind of obvious, but a boss from an organization you left on bad terms with, which, I mean, I think normally if you left on bad terms from a job, you're probably not going to use them as a reference, right? That only makes sense because they're not going to be your stellar, generally, right? Now, some of them will say, "Oh, we'll give you a good reference, whatever." But I would still try to choose other ones, or just to be careful with that one, I guess is what I would say. Okay, so let's see. Please remember to drop your questions, any questions that you have, into the chat box, and I'm happy to answer those. We're going to talk for a few minutes here on formatting your references, right? There's many different ways. This is just an example from online. I mean, some people will do all flush left. I like having the either centered for the top part, which is your personal information. You have professional references for, and then your name or whatever. And I like having that centered. But then as to whether you put left, left formatted, right? Or you do centered, it can work either way. But what's important is the information that you include there, right? You're going to include their full name and their title and their company, right? And the now this has address, like that's not a bad idea. I mean, it shows where they were based and whatever, but it's really most important to have the other information, the at least their phone number and their email, because they're not going to be generally writing snail mail to do a reference check. They're going to be emailing them with some form they want them to complete, or oftentimes calling them because they want to get that information on the fly in the moment, because that means more, right? They can get more information from it. So you want to include this information for them. And then what it also includes is your relationship, their relationship to you. So former supervisor, or it might be colleague. You can see here, and this is one way here, like, note, Joe was my boss at Clarify for 2 years. And that's fine to speak in the first tense if you want. I oftentimes just put relate, like where it's executive director and, where it says there in parentheses, former supervisor, or, or right underneath it, relation, former supervisor. So you can do it either way. I mean, there's not, either way is absolutely fine with that. Okay. But one thing that's really important on this is that you make sure that you keep up to speed on your references changes in email, in work, in their home, all of that. Because if you don't do that and you give outdated information, that's not a good, that doesn't shine, that doesn't reflect well on you when they're going to actually do that reference check. Okay. So hopefully this gives you a little more information on like how how you format it, right? So let's talk about when to provide references. Okay. Generally, this is generally, right? You don't provide the references with your initial application, nor do you say in your resume, references available upon request, because guess what? That's obvious. You practically almost always will be asked for references. So why waste the space on your resume or in your cover letter saying references available upon request? It just doesn't make sense, right? But have them ready so that you can have them ready for like the interview, for example. When you do interview, I personally counsel people to, I mean, if you have strong references and you have them all set and you know that their information is correct and they've given you the green light to share their information with whoever, at the end of your interview, it's pretty impressive to say something like, I do have a copy of my professional references, all of whom can attest to my strengths and dedication as an employee, and you have it in your portfolio and you are offering it if they're interested, right? If they'd like it. Now, the one thing to remember, if you do that, you want to make sure to notify the employer right away that you did share the references. They may or may not be hearing from them. You offered them up in the interview, just to give them a heads up, right? And we'll get into the like how to let them know and what information to provide to your references as well to best help you once they do come out to them, right? So that's a little bit on the when, right? Typically it's when they request them. And oftentimes, I mean, sometimes they will request, they'll say, send your letter along with 3 references to, and that's fine. If they do what they ask. But if they don't, just have them ready for, like that interview, for example, or for once they do that that interview with you and they decide they want to check references, have them all available and ready so that you've cleared it with the other, the references. So you don't have to go around and wait to hear back from them. Is it okay to use a reference? You want to clear that. You want to let your references know if you're in the job search and just say, thank you so much for serving as a reference in the past. I just wanted to let you know I'm currently, thinking about a potential job change and wanted to make sure, it would be okay with you still to use you. I would, of course, always provide my most recent resume and or the, snippet of when I worked for you in particular, and a copy of the job description to help you in that capacity. So then you're making it easy for them, right? They get that call from a reference, they can pull up the email you sent and they can look at those key qualifications they're looking for. And as they're asking them, they can totally feed right into that and do a great job of helping sell you for that position. Make sure that you're really come across strong for that position. Okay. So how to format them, right? You definitely actually, and I've covered this, I'm sorry, let's go ahead and go on. How to get the strongest references. Try, and this is obvious, whenever possible, try to leave on a good note, even if you are really struggling, you do not like the job and you are leaving because you just whatever, you want to get out, you want to get away. Try to really just continue doing a good job and leave on that good note, that positive note, because that sets the ground. It sets the, it allows them to then, if you left on a good note, didn't totally leave them in the dust where, oh, I'm just going to leave, I'm not going to give them 2 weeks notice, I'm not going to do whatever. It really can be an undue burden for them, or maybe it is a deserved burden, right? Maybe they're an awful employer, whatever, but it definitely leaves that bad taste in their mouth toward you, which they're not going to be as good of a reference then. So try to be, respectful of that, if at all possible. Stay in touch. This is really important. I think RPCVs and people in general, yeah, the mistake they make with references is, they get these strong references, they do a great job, but then they just, they like, once they get that new job, they just, you fall off the face of the earth. You're not in touch anymore, right? So try to stay in touch, whether it's, with the occasional, it doesn't have to be every month, but maybe it's, the end of the year when you do, whether it's a holiday card or a New Year's, card or something, or just a check-in, hey, I just wanted to, update you on the job that I took. Again, I so appreciate the reference you gave me. I'm really enjoying the challenge of blah, 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 letting them know that you're really happy, or whatever the case is, right? And thank you again for your reference, which was an integral part, to the process. Let me know if I can help you in any way, those kind of things, so that it's more of a, you stay in touch, right? And that way, when the next job comes about, you're still in touch too. So you can still consider using them until it gets to be such an old experience that maybe it wouldn't work now. But always alert them. I can't stress always enough. I put it in all caps here. Always alert them and give them the heads up when you've released their name and information, for a reference, because that just allows them to get set in their mind and like, okay, let me review his resume or her resume, and let me, it helps. So let them know. And I generally do say, send them a copy of or maybe it's not even a copy of the job description. Maybe that can be overwhelming. Maybe you copy the job, you have the job description as an attachment, but you say, this job is basically looking for the following 3 characteristics or skill set, whatever. And, I'm confident I, have this skill set. I'm really excited about the challenge and the opportunity to blah, 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 so that they can then have that right there and just pull that little letter up, because the reference checker, they don't know that they have this written down. But let me ask you this. Which one sounds like, say you worked for somebody, 5 years ago, and which of these scenarios sounds better? So somebody asked me, hey, can you tell me, about, when did this person work for you? And well, let's see, 2000, was it 12 to 15? Okay, does that sound impressive? Not, right? Or if they get that call and they have that resume right there, they can pull it up and they can say, sure, Jody worked for me from 2014 to 2016 and blah, 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 blah. What, it's right there. And so to the reference checker, they're like, wow, they really remember this person, that they obviously left on a, left a good positive impression. I hope that makes sense. So it really, really is important to do that and help. You're basically prepping them to talk best about you, right? It's going to help you in the long run. And then lastly, thanking them, right? Letting them know when you do change the position, right? That you appreciate the role they played in this new job, and you look forward to staying in touch, and whatever. And then make sure that you do, right? So does this make sense so far? I mean, are there questions? I don't see any in the chat box, but do folks have any questions they'd like to either ask verbally here? You can certainly unmute yourself, or just dump them in the chat box. I'm happy to address any questions that are out there. Okay.
Oh, hi, Gary here.
Hi, Gary.
Just had a question for federal resumes when you're applying
Yep.
to the federal government. I think the standard format is to include references at the bottom, right?
Yep. In federal, when you're doing your USA jobs, resume and all of that, you actually have to. This is one of the areas where it's different than a regular resume. You're actually including your supervisor's name, right? their information, right, and relationship, to you. So you're actually giving that when you do each of those, each of your job listings. So those are in essence references, right? Those would be your professional references, right? Now, they do give you the opportunity to say either do not contact, right? Like if you don't want somebody to be contacted, because there might be one reference that one person that, or organization, you just don't want them to really contact them for whatever reason. Maybe it was a difficult situation. Maybe it was, who knows? But you have that option to say that. Now, when that becomes an issue is if all of your, all of your former supervisors that you have listed down there, it's do not contact, like these are people from the past. There's no impact on you currently with them. Why are you not comfortable with any of your references being checked? That's a big no, like that's a big, leaves a lot of questions, right? But if it's your most current one, like your current employer, and you're looking at other jobs, absolutely that makes sense to have you put, do not contact, or you could put, please notify me first, which they keyword should do. And they generally do, but I have heard of situations where the HR personnel, when they've been checking, they've reached out to the employer that they've said, please contact me first, please notify me first. They've listed that on their resume, and they have done it without notifying them, which really stinks. I mean, that shouldn't be done, right? But when you're doing your federal resume, whether or not you're using the USA Jobs Builder template, which that guarantees that you're not going to miss anything. But I will say, I hate the way it looks. But that said, I am not an HR professional, and for them, they like it because, and I understand, everything's in the exact same position. They know exactly where everything is. So it's a lot easier for them to physically screen through those applicants, because they are doing that. They're not just dumping it into an applicant tracking system and never looking at it. So, so definitely watch, those kind of things. And if you don't put that information on a federal resume, that's grounds for leaving you. You can be left out of you can be disqualified, right? So you got to make sure if you are doing your own federal resume that you include all of that information, right? For each of the jobs, your supervisor, their contact information, whether or not it's okay to contact them. Used to be they would ask for your salary or highest grade. Now they're not so much making that required, which is a really good thing, because it helps people get more of a fair salary without, just looking at, what it was beforehand. So great question, Gary. Does that answer it? Or do you have another aspect you want to ask about?
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Just to follow up. So
Sure.
if you're recently out of the Peace Corps and say
Yep.
you're, you have supervisors that are in another country, different time zone,
Yep.
like 18 hours away, you still provide the phone number and the email?
Yep, I would absolutely, because let's be honest. Typically, they would be reaching them by email, or they could reach them by Zoom. They could, I mean, that's as good as you get. Like that's as close to we have of, the in-person. So absolutely, I would probably note on when you're doing your reference, I don't know what country you served in.
It was the Philippines.
Okay, yeah.
Everyone was fluent in English.
So, okay, and that's fine. So, but to put like the time differential, like that's significant, right? You'd want to notify them.
Yeah, it'd be like a 12 hours something.
Exactly. So you want to notify them that it's a, there's a 12-hour differential from East Coast time or whatever it is, wherever you are. So good questions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one, Jody.
Sure.
So if the supervisor, left the company actually and went to another job, all the supervisors died, so those are the situations.
Yep. No, that's a really good question. Thank you for bringing that up, because I didn't have that on my slide, and I definitely intended on covering that, right? So there's a variety of reasons why your former supervisor may be unavailable. Maybe they've moved on to another company. You're no longer in touch with them, so you can't really, right, find them, right? Or it could be maybe sadly, they're deceased, or other. And what I would recommend you do, if you, putting, for example, no longer there, if you're not in touch with them anymore, if they're asking for your most recent employer, like this is different than provide to me 3 professional references. that's when you're going to like dig up and do whatever. If you've lost touch with them, well, you know what? You're really lucky, because in today's day and age, you probably can get back in touch with them without too much problem. Use a LinkedIn people search. You're probably going to be able to get in touch with them again, chances are, right? And if you do, then you would want to broach the subject and say, it's so good to be reconnected. I feel so bad we lost touch. I didn't realize you'd left XYZ company, and time flies. I've been here and have really enjoyed blah, 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 blah. Currently looking at alternatives, wondering if you might still be willing to be a reference from your experience supervising me in the XYZ role, like just to refresh them too, because time goes by, right? But you do what you can to get, back in touch with them. But otherwise you might, use for your professional references somebody else, right? Maybe you're not going to have someone from every job anyway, right? But you could, if you put their name and then no longer there for under, like employer, and then, your supervisor's name, that's fine. But I wouldn't necessarily put them as a reference, because if you're not in touch with them anymore, then you can't really give them their contact information. That's not a reference, right? That's a former reference who the information's invalid. I hope that helps, Alice.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Awesome. Other questions on, how to get the strongest references, or anything we've been talking about here tonight? I'm here to help. I'll bring it to this page, because of course this is our Q&A page now. So we're, at the end of the slides, and, certainly able to answer any questions, whether you dump them into the chat box, or you want to just, as people have been doing, I really appreciate it, Holden, Gary, Alice, just unmuting yourself and saying your question. That's fine too.
I have a question that's Holden. So instead of just like going asking for your references, do they the employers sometimes just like call the companies that you have on your resume and just try to talk to someone there, or is that
I'm
less?
sorry. So you're saying instead of asking you for references, do they sometimes just call your companies and ask about you?
Yeah.
Generally not. I have not heard of organizations that would do that. And part of that's probably the liability aspect. Like when they ask you for references, they're asking you for your permission to reach out to their whoever you provide and talk to them about your, whatever. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not saying this is like that could be a lawsuit or whatever, but I have not heard of that happening necessarily, unless, I guess the one thing I would say is, let's say you worked for a company that they know somebody who works in that company, and they want to know what they know about you, right? They want to know what that person who worked in your company, your former company, knows about you, whether or not they know about you. Sometimes they can get, that's just separate from, references altogether, right? Oh yeah, she was always doing da 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 da, or, they could get really, good or bad information, right, from that. But that could certainly happen. But in terms of an employer saying, I'm just going to reach out and say, I'm actually calling to check references on this person, I haven't heard of that happening off the cuff, unless the person's already, provided that list of references or whatever, saying it's okay. Anyone else? I'm happy to.
Want to make a comment,
Sure.
like I don't like to ask people for things, but like with all these references and stuff like that, my experience, learned it the hard way, of course, like okay, so even if you think that you probably don't need that person, but you do eventually, because my point is, I volunteer for something, and then the supervisor of volunteers, she retired, and then
Right.
okay, then I have to look for somebody else, as reference.
Not necessarily.
You know?
not necessarily, because you could put that person's name and then in parentheses retired, and if you have their updated information, which you should keep in touch with them to keep that, you could totally still, just because they're no longer at the company doesn't mean they can't speak to you about your volunteer work or whatever kind of work it was at that organization.
Okay.
So yeah, absolutely. Retired is another one. That's a big one too. When you list, your employers and supervisor's name and relationship to you, is it okay to contact for a federal job? That might happen a lot, right? That they're retired. So
Okay.
you just might put their updated information for them because they're not going to get anywhere with the old, right? But if you don't know it, then you just put retired and you put, no longer there or retired. If they're no longer in that organization, because let's face it, people move organizations and positions all the time. So, when you're constructing your federal resume, you just put in there, no longer there, retired, whatever.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, I'm giving the option here. If you do have any final questions related to securing the most positive, the strongest references, please drop them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. And if you don't, I will be sharing some information afterwards, including, as I usually do, some links to some articles and such, that resources that can help you with, preparing your references and, who to ask, those kinds of things. So I will definitely get that out to you within the next day or so. So you'll have that too. Okay. All right, so I think what we'll do is I'm going to at least, I will stop the recording here, and then if folks do want to stay on for a moment, like I said, I'm always willing to stay on afterwards if you have additional questions. So happy to, see, here you go. I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you everyone for coming here. And I hope to see you in future events. This Wednesday we're going to be focusing on humanitarian work, and IRC is going to be the featured employer in my Jobs with Jody podcast, noon on Wednesdays. And we'd love to see you there if you're interested as well. Just go ahead and register at our events page, which is always peacecorpsconnect.org/events. Thanks, everyone.